The human mind is a complex and fascinating entity, with many unanswered questions about behavior and psychology, and let's be honest, sometimes we can't even figure out why we do what we do, right? Like why do we hit the snooze button over and over again? Or why do we always seem to forget where we put our keys? It's like our brains are playing tricks on us. But in all seriousness, understanding human behavior can help us better navigate our personal and professional lives. It can help us build stronger relationships, make better decisions, and even improve our overall well-being. So if you're curious about what makes us tick, and why we do the things we do, then you're in the right place, because today we're going to dive into the fascinating world of psychology and explore 51 interesting psychological facts about human behavior, from the way we think and feel, to the way we interact with others, and the things that motivate and influence us. So buckle up, because this is going to be a wild ride, and by the end of it, you'll have a better understanding of yourself and the people around you. And who knows, you might even learn a thing or two about why you hit that snooze button over and over again. So let's dive into some of these fascinating psychological facts, starting with habit formation. Have you ever tried to start a new habit, like going to the gym or eating healthy, and you're all gung-ho for the first week or two, but then you start to lose steam? Well, it turns out that it takes approximately 66 days for a habit to form, with a range of 18 to 254 days. That's right. It can take anywhere from a few weeks to almost a year for a new behavior to become automatic. So if you're trying to form a new habit, don't get discouraged if you don't see results right away. Just keep at it, and eventually, it'll become second nature. And speaking of things that become second nature, have you ever found yourself driving on a quiet road, and suddenly you realize you've been on autopilot for the past few miles, and you have no idea what you've been thinking about? Well, it turns out that our minds wander a lot. In fact, our minds wander about 30% of the time, and when we're doing something mundane like driving on quiet roads, that number increases to 70%. That's right, almost 3/4 of the time, our minds are off doing who knows what, daydreaming, thinking about what we're going to eat for lunch, or replaying that annoying conversation we had with our coworker. And this mind wandering can actually be a good thing. It can help us be more creative, and come up with new ideas. But it can also be a bad thing, like when we're driving and we're not paying attention to the road, and that brings us to decision making. Have you ever made a decision, and then wondered why you made it? Like, what was going through your mind? Well, it turns out that 95% of our decisions are made subconsciously, with the remaining 5% being conscious choices. That's right. Most of the time, we're not even aware of why we're making the decisions we're making. Our subconscious mind is like a powerful computer, processing all sorts of information and making decisions without us even realizing it, and this can be both a good thing and a bad thing. On the one hand, it can help us make quick decisions and avoid analysis paralysis, but on the other hand, it can also lead us to make impulsive decisions that we might later regret. So the next time you make a decision, take a step back and ask yourself, was that really a conscious choice, or was it just my subconscious mind running the show? So let's talk about something that we've all experienced at some point or another: emotional pain. We've all been there, whether it's a breakup, a fight with a friend, or the loss of a loved one. Emotional pain can be overwhelming, and it's not just in our heads. It can actually trigger physical pain, like headaches or joint discomfort. That's right, the emotional pain can manifest itself in our bodies. And this is because our brains are wired to respond to emotional pain in a similar way to physical pain. It's like our brain is saying, hey, this emotional pain is so bad. It's like we're actually hurt, and it's releasing all these chemicals and hormones to try and deal with it. And this can be really tough to deal with, because not only are we feeling emotional pain, but we're also feeling physical symptoms, like we're stuck in this vicious cycle of hurt and discomfort. And if we're not careful, this emotional pain can lead to even more serious issues, like loneliness. Chronic loneliness can be a real problem. It can lead to psychological issues like depression, and even affect our physical health. It's like our bodies are designed to be social, and when we're not getting that social interaction, it can have some serious consequences. And that's why friendships are so important. They can help us feel connected, and reduce feelings of loneliness. But did you know that there's actually a limit to the number of friends we can handle? It's called Dunbar's number, and it's reportedly 150. That's right, the maximum number of friends we can handle is 150. Now, this doesn't mean we can't have more than 150 acquaintances, or people we know, but in terms of close friends, people we really connect with, it's around 150, and this is because our brains can only handle so much social information. We can only keep track of so many relationships, and that's why we often find ourselves drifting apart from people, or feeling overwhelmed by our social lives. It's like our brains are saying, okay, I've got 150 friends, that's enough, I don't have room for anyone else, and this can be a real challenge, because in today's world, we're constantly connected, we've got social media, and texting, and email, and it's like we're expected to be connected to everyone, all the time, but the truth is, our brains just aren't wired that way. We need to prioritize our relationships, and focus on the people who are really important to us, and that's why it's so important to nurture our friendships, to make time for the people we care about, and to prioritize our social connections, because in the end, it's these relationships that make life worth living. So let's keep exploring these fascinating psychological facts, and talk about something that can have a really big impact on our relationships: self-fulfilling prophecies. Have you ever met someone and just assumed they were going to be a certain way? Maybe you thought they were going to be mean, or lazy, or unfriendly, and then, lo and behold, they turn out to be exactly that. Well, it turns out that our assumptions about others can actually influence their behavior and outcomes. It's like we're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, where our expectations become a reality, and this can be really powerful, because if we assume someone is going to be friendly and helpful, they're more likely to be. And if we assume someone is going to be mean and uncooperative, they're more likely to be that too. It's like our expectations are shaping the way they behave, and this can be really important to keep in mind, especially in our personal and professional relationships, because if we're assuming the worst about someone, we might actually be creating a situation where they're more likely to behave in a negative way, and that brings us to the sunk cost fallacy. Have you ever found yourself throwing good money after bad? Maybe you invested in a stock that's tanking, or you're in a relationship that's not working out, but you're hanging on because you don't want to lose what you've already put in. Well, it turns out that this is a common cognitive bias, where we tend to throw good money after bad due to subjective thinking. We're essentially saying, I've already invested so much, I don't want to lose it all, even if it's not making sense to keep going, and this can be really costly, not just financially, but also emotionally, because we're pouring our time and energy into something that's not working, and it's not going to get any better, and that brings us to the idea of control. We like to think that we're in control of our thoughts and actions, but the truth is, our perception of control is often an illusion. There are all sorts of external factors guiding our thoughts and actions, from our environment, to our culture, to our past experiences, and even our biology. It's like we're being influenced by all these different forces, and we're not even aware of it, and this can be really liberating, because if we realize that we're not always in control, we can start to let go of some of that responsibility, and just go with the flow. But it can also be really scary, because if we're not in control, then what is? And that's a question that psychologists and philosophers have been debating for centuries, and it's something that we'll probably never fully understand, but it's definitely worth exploring, because the more we understand about how our minds work, the more we can take control of our lives, or at least, the more we can understand why we're doing what we're doing. So let's keep exploring these fascinating psychological facts, and talk about something that's really cool: mirror neurons. Have you ever caught yourself mimicking someone's behavior or mannerisms? Maybe you've noticed that you're sitting in the same way as someone else, or using the same phrases. Well, it turns out that this is because of mirror neurons, which are special cells in our brain that help us learn by copying others. It's like our brain is wired to mimic the people around us, and this is how we learn new skills and behaviors, from walking and talking, to complex social behaviors like empathy and cooperation. Our mirror neurons are driving our daily functions and behaviors, and this is really important, because it means that we're constantly learning and adapting, even when we're not aware of it, and it's also why we're so influenced by the people around us. Because our brains are literally copying their behavior, and that brings us to dopamine, which is often associated with pleasure, but it's also so much more than that. Dopamine is like a motivator. It's what drives us to pursue new experiences and learn new things. It's what makes us curious, and it's what helps us tackle new ideas and challenges. And this is really important, because it means that we have the power to boost our own motivation and creativity, just by seeking out new experiences and challenges, and by being open to learning and growth. And that brings us to intelligence, which is a complex and multifaceted trait that's influenced by all sorts of factors, including genetics and environmental factors. It's like our intelligence is shaped by a combination of nature and nurture, and this is really interesting, because it means that our intelligence is not fixed. It's something that can be developed and improved through education, practice, and experience. And it's also why we see such a wide range of abilities and talents in people, because everyone's intelligence is unique and influenced by their own individual combination of genetic and environmental factors. And this is really liberating, because it means that we all have the potential to learn and grow, and to develop our own unique abilities and talents. And it's also a reminder that intelligence is not just about being book smart, it's about being able to adapt, and to learn, and to navigate the world in our own unique way. And that's something that we can all cultivate, regardless of our background or circumstances. So the next time you're feeling stuck, or like you're not smart enough, just remember that your intelligence is like a muscle. It can be developed and strengthened, with practice, patience, and persistence. So let's keep exploring these fascinating psychological facts, and talk about something that can be really tricky: confirmation bias. Have you ever found yourself reading an article or watching a video, and you're like, yes, this is totally true. This confirms everything I've been thinking? Well, it turns out that we all have a tendency to interpret facts in a way that confirms our existing beliefs. It's like our brains are wired to seek out information that supports what we already think, and ignore information that contradicts it. And this can be really problematic, because it means that we're not always getting an accurate picture of the world, we're just seeing what we want to see. And this can lead to all sorts of issues, from misunderstandings and miscommunications, to prejudice and discrimination. And it's not just about being close-minded, it's about how our brains are wired. We're all prone to confirmation bias, and it's something that we need to be aware of, so that we can try to overcome it, and seek out diverse perspectives, and consider different points of view. And that brings us to reactance, which is a really interesting phenomenon, where we break more rules when we feel our freedoms are being limited. It's like, the more someone tells us we can't do something, the more we want to do it. And this can be really counterproductive, because it means that we're often rebelling against rules and restrictions, just for the sake of rebelling, rather than because we really need to. And this can lead to all sorts of problems, from social unrest and conflict, to personal struggles and addictions. And it's not just about being rebellious, it's about how our brains respond to perceived threats to our freedom. And that brings us to something that's a little more lighthearted: cute aggression. Have you ever seen something that's so cute, you just want to squeeze it, or cuddle it, or maybe even bite it? Well, it turns out that this is a real thing, and it's called cute aggression, and it's a mix of positive and negative feelings that we experience when we encounter something that's really cute. It's like our brains are overwhelmed by the cuteness, and we don't know how to process it, so we respond with a mix of affection and aggression. And this can be really funny, because it means that we're all secretly a little bit crazy when it comes to cute things. And it's not just about being playful, it's about how our brains respond to stimuli that's perceived as cute. And it's something that's been observed in all sorts of situations, from interacting with puppies and kittens, to looking at cute pictures and videos online. So the next time you find yourself feeling the urge to squeeze a cute animal, or cuddle a cute toy, just remember, it's not just you. It's a psychological phenomenon, and it's totally normal. So let's keep exploring these fascinating psychological facts, and talk about something that's really interesting: the serial position effect. Have you ever noticed how you can remember the first and last items on a list, but the ones in the middle are a bit fuzzy? Well, it turns out that this is a real phenomenon, and it's because our brains are wired to remember beginnings and ends more easily than middles. It's like our brains are taking a mental snapshot of the start and finish of a sequence, but the middle bits get a bit blurry, and this can be really useful to know, because it means that if you want to remember something, you should try to make it the first or last thing on the list, and that brings us to false memories, which is a really mind-blowing topic, because it turns out that our brains can actually create false memories, filling in gaps in our recollection with information that didn't actually happen. It's like our brains are trying to make sense of the world. And sometimes they get it wrong, and this can be really problematic, because it means that our memories are not always reliable, and it's not just about forgetting things, it's about actually remembering things that didn't happen, and this can have serious consequences, from eyewitness testimony in court cases, to personal relationships and memories, and it's not just about lying or making things up. It's about how our brains are wired to process and store information, and that brings us to pareidolia, which is a really cool phenomenon, where we tend to see patterns and faces in random or ambiguous visual patterns. It's like our brains are wired to recognize faces and patterns, and sometimes they get a bit overzealous, and start seeing things that aren't really there, like seeing a face in a cloud, or a pattern in a random splatter of paint, and this can be really fun, because it means that our brains are always trying to make sense of the world, and sometimes they come up with some really creative and interesting interpretations, and it's not just about being imaginative. It's about how our brains are wired to process visual information, and it's something that's been observed in all sorts of situations, from art and design, to science and nature. So the next time you see a face in a cloud, or a pattern in a random shape, just remember, it's not just you, it's your brain's way of trying to make sense of the world, and it's a pretty cool thing to experience. So let's keep exploring these fascinating psychological facts, and talk about something that can be really insightful, the fundamental attribution error. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, oh, they're just being lazy, or they're just being rude, when someone does something that you don't agree with? Well, it turns out that we all have a tendency to attribute others' behavior to their character, rather than the situational context. It's like we're saying, they're a bad person rather than they're having a bad day. And this can be really problematic, because it means that we're not always giving people the benefit of the doubt, and we're not always considering the circumstances that might be influencing their behavior, and this can lead to all sorts of issues, from misunderstandings and conflicts, to prejudice and stereotyping. And it's not just about being judgmental, it's about how our brains are wired to make sense of the world, and how we tend to oversimplify complex situations, and that brings us to the third-person effect, which is a really interesting phenomenon, where we believe that others are more susceptible to persuasion than we are. It's like we're saying, oh, they'll definitely fall for that scam, or they'll definitely be influenced by that advertisement, but when it comes to ourselves, we're like, no way, I'm immune to that stuff, and this can be really funny, because it means that we're all a bit delusional, and we think we're more resistant to persuasion than we actually are, and this can have serious consequences, from falling prey to scams and propaganda, to making poor decisions and choices. And it's not just about being gullible, it's about how our brains are wired to perceive ourselves and others, and that brings us to the dopamine loop, which is a really powerful force that drives our behavior and decision-making. It's like our brains are wired to seek out information and pleasure, and we become addicted to the feeling of excitement and satisfaction that we get from it. And this can be really problematic, because it means that we're constantly seeking out new sources of stimulation and pleasure, and we can get caught up in a cycle of addiction and craving, whether it's social media, or video games, or even just scrolling through our phones. And it's not just about being weak-willed, it's about how our brains are wired to respond to rewards and pleasure, and it's something that we need to be aware of, so that we can make conscious choices about how we're spending our time, and what we're seeking out, and so that we can break free from the dopamine loop, and find more meaningful and fulfilling ways to live our lives. So let's keep exploring these fascinating psychological facts, and talk about something that's really interesting, the reminiscence bump. Have you ever found yourself nostalgic for your teenage years or early 20s? and you can remember all sorts of details from that time. But when it comes to more recent events, your memory is a bit fuzzy. Well, it turns out that this is a real phenomenon. And it's because our brains tend to recall experiences from adolescence and early adulthood more easily. It's like our brains are wired to remember the formative years of our lives, and the experiences that shaped us into who we are today. And this can be really powerful, because it means that our memories from this time period can have a lasting impact on our identities and sense of self. And it's not just about nostalgia, it's about how our brains are wired to process and store memories, and that brings us to self-distancing, which is a really useful technique for problem-solving and decision-making. It's like taking a step back and considering our problems from an outsider's perspective, and this can help us find effective solutions, because when we're too close to a problem, it's easy to get caught up in our own emotions and biases. But when we take a step back and look at it from a more objective perspective, we can see things more clearly and make more rational decisions. And this can be really helpful in all sorts of situations, from personal relationships to professional challenges. And it's not just about being objective, it's about being able to regulate our emotions and thoughts, and approach problems with a clear and level head. And that brings us to volunteering, which is a really powerful way to improve our happiness, health, and sense of well-being, and even increase our lifespan. It's like helping others is a win-win, because not only do we get to make a positive impact on the world, but we also get to experience the benefits of altruism. And this can be really profound, because it means that we can find meaning and purpose in our lives by helping others. And it's not just about feeling good, it's about actually living a longer and healthier life. And it's something that's been shown time and time again in studies, that people who volunteer regularly tend to have lower blood pressure, lower stress levels, and a greater sense of well-being. And it's not just about the physical benefits, it's about the emotional and psychological benefits too. Because when we help others, we feel more connected, more empathetic, and more compassionate, and that can have a profound impact on our mental health and happiness. So if you're looking for a way to improve your life and make a positive impact on the world, volunteering is a great place to start. So let's keep exploring these fascinating psychological facts and talk about something that's really important, the complexity of human behavior. It's like, we're all unique and multifaceted, influenced by a huge range of psychological, social, and environmental factors, from our genetics and upbringing, to our culture and life experiences, and this can make it really challenging to understand ourselves and others. But it's also what makes us so interesting and dynamic, and by recognizing the complexity of human behavior, we can start to appreciate the many different factors that shape our thoughts, feelings, and actions, and this can help us better navigate our personal and professional lives, because when we understand what drives us, and what motivates us, we can make more informed decisions, and cultivate more meaningful relationships. And it's not just about self-awareness, it's about being aware of the people around us, and the factors that influence their behavior, and by doing so, we can become more empathetic, more compassionate, and more effective in our interactions with others. And that brings us to the importance of embracing our unique personalities and strengths, because when we do, we can unlock our full potential and achieve success and happiness. It's like, we all have our own special talents and abilities, and when we focus on developing those, we can become truly unstoppable. And it's not just about achieving success, it's about living a life that's true to who we are, and that brings us joy and fulfillment. And it's something that's available to everyone, regardless of their background or circumstances, because we all have the power to choose how we live our lives, and to cultivate the qualities and strengths that will help us succeed. And it's a really empowering message, because it means that we're not limited by our past, or by our circumstances. We're limited only by our own imagination, and our own willingness to take risks and pursue our dreams. And that's a really exciting thought, because it means that we all have the potential to achieve great things, and to live a life that's full of purpose, and meaning, and happiness. And it's something that we can all strive for, by being true to ourselves, and by embracing our unique personalities and strengths, and by understanding the complex and multifaceted nature of human behavior, we can unlock our full potential, and achieve success, and happiness, and live a life that's truly extraordinary.